Hello, I'm Alex from IGN, and I'm joined by Luke.
Hello.
And you're a long-term Final Fantasy fan, and here we are playing Lightning Returns Final Fantasy, and now it's been a really, really long time since I've played a Final Fantasy game. Actually, Final Fantasy VII was the last time I played a Final Fantasy game. So we're going to sit down and play this game for a bit, and you're going to tell me whether this is a good time to come back to the series or not, as the case may be.
Yeah, so, okay, it's quite a different game to the other Final Fantasy games. So when you played it, I mean, you were saying Final Fantasy VII. A lot of people associate Final Fantasy, obviously, with turn-based battles, RPG, styly, which, some people really love, some people don't. The difference with this one is that you don't have that turn-based battle system. It's more of an action battle system. And so it's all in real time. You've got to balance the fact that you've got 3 different gauges, gauges even, that are filling at different speeds. It's quite complex, and it's actually something that a lot of long-term Final Fantasy fans haven't really gone for. But there's a lot more customizing. Gone are the kind of levels of old. You have these things called schemata, which basically, if I show you here, you can look through. These are the different schemata, and they're all kind of costume-based. And you can change your weapons and your clothes, so I can make a lightning look like that if I fancy. You can see the Japanese influence. And anyway, you can choose their weapons, mix it up.
That's all pretty standard stuff, though, for a Final Fantasy game, though, right?
It is, but it's slightly different in the sense that you don't have such a linear leveling system. It's a lot more about, you finding these outfits, and they are gated. You do find them at different occasions. But you can kind of customize it to make your own kind of move set, if you will. So I've got Thundara, which is a lightning spell here, but I can change it for a wind one if I fancy, or I can change it for an ice one. And the point is you're trying to find complementary costumes that go with complementary weapons, that go with complementary skills. But it's all much more action-packed. And Nazi 15, which is coming out at some stage in the future on PS4 and Xbox One. And that looks like it has a much more action-paced combat system. So this is kind of actually a good introduction, because that piqued the interest of some people who aren't perhaps long-term fans of the franchise. So this is kind of a great entry system. So at this point in the game, we're near the end of the first... we've done some stuff in the first city. I'll show you a battle now, just to give you a taste of the action. Right. So it's going to be pretty manic, but it's okay. So... do you have a clue what's going on?
Yeah, of course I do. So when you explained it as a kind of action RPG, I kind of imagined it to be, I guess, maybe a bit more like Zelda, where you have direct control over it.
Oh, it's slightly more like Devil May Cry type thing?
Yeah, but it actually pulls you into an arena for the fighting.
Completely. Right. And there can be more than one enemy. And you are basically, as you can see, I'm changing costumes. Those bars down the bottom, as they empty, I use an ability to empty them, and when I run out of the bar, I can't do anything more, so I have to change to another costume.
Right.
And obviously each costume has different strengths and weaknesses. So at this point in the game, it's quite early on. The point is the world is going to end in 13 days. You have 6 days in which to save it, but you can extend the time you have, so you can push back the apocalypse by doing side quests and things. If you fail or you die, though, then you lose time. And so in actual fact, it's risk reward, right?
Yep.
Do you risk trying to extend it? A lot of people have kind of thought maybe it's like Majora's Mask, in the sense that you can navigate time, but it's not like that at all. Lightning Returns Final Fantasy 13 rather than Final Fantasy 13-3, because they want people. I mean, the story's a bit complicated, I think, but to be honest, I don't really know if I was following the story up until this point, so I don't know if jumping in now would actually make any difference to me.
So, as far as you're concerned, it's almost like you could play it as a standalone game rather than having to have the knowledge and the heritage from previous games.
You can. In the same way as the Harry Potter films work, there is a lot of kind of exposition in terms of the dialogue. So, and sometimes that does come across a bit corny, but they are very, very much spoon-feeding you all the backstory. So if you have missed it, it's like you meet cats and they're like, oh, yeah, there was a time when he fought alongside me and he was in love with my sister. And da-da-da-da-da. And so you do catch up. But again, my personal feeling is that this has been one of the less gripping of the Final Fantasy stories. So it's not exactly the end of the world if you don't follow it. And the cinematics are good. It's well put together. So at this point, end of kind of the first city. There are 4 main kind of big quest hubs.
So, like, you're changing through the schemata on the fly.
I am, yes.
Like, how many can you kind of preload and...
So you can have 3 at a time.
Right.
And you can see them in the bottom left. You can have 3 at a time. At this stage in the game, as I say, it's quite early, so I actually only have about 4 that I can kind of mix up with. So, like, you know, as I say, I've got the Mist Wizard one that I'm currently not using. But I could put... so Dark Muse comes with God's Grammar Sacks and Double Cross. But I could put them with Mist Wizard, even though Mist Wizard is actually meant to be used with Devil's Daughter. You know, so it's...
You are speaking an entirely different language.
It's complicated, but the way it kind of works is... The point is customization.
Yeah, you can see obviously the pros and cons on the bottom right there. So strength, magic, ATB. What's that?
ATB. So the ATB bars are those bars that are your
Gotcha.
ability bars.
Yeah.
And it stands for active time battle. And so it's how quickly they refill.
Right.
When you're not using them. I mean, I, this is quite early in the game, so I'm fighting quite quickly because I'm basically just bludgeoning the enemies into submission. You can, if you fancy it, well, the further you go on, you have to be a lot more tactical in terms of, you know, withholding your attacks for moments you might need it. Oh, God, down I go. And yeah, you actually instigate battles. You can run around and kind of avoid them. You can press certain buttons to get, you know, kind of, or if you attack them first, you get a bonus to make things a bit easier.
Right. Because that was definitely one of the things from earlier Final Fantasy games was the random battles, because you obviously you could never see them, and then suddenly the screen would spiral, you'd be straight into a battle, and it's like,
completely.
I'm just trying to get from point A to point B.
Yeah,
so you're able to do that much more in this game.
It is now much, much easier to kind of avoid enemies and avoid battles if you don't want, so...
But obviously you're not levelling up while
this
you're
is the
doing
thing, but again, the point with this is that leveling up is less of a emphasis, if you get me. So
yeah.
It's more to do with having the weapon. Oh God! So there you go. They start with me, so I start with less health P. But it's less emphasised, the whole levelling thing. So if you fancy, you could just run from battle to battle. You won't get the drops that you need. Here they drop abilities. So again, it gives you more customization options.
Right.
So it makes sense, you know, for you to fight some battles. But if you are rushing around, you can. And in terms of stat increases, which traditionally come from levelling up, in this game, not the case. In this game, you get stat increases by completing side quests. So if you fancy it, you could really just do... I'm just trying to turn the different moves off. You can do what you fancy, you know. You can rush and run around. And again, because there are time limits, I mean, time freezes when you're in battle.
Right.
But there is, you know, you might just want to kind of focus on the main quest and getting through that. But the downside is you lose the opportunity to kind of get new abilities, power up, and get more time to, you know. But the developers have seen you will not see every single thing in a single playthrough,
So obviously you're playing with just a single character at the minute. Is there team battles, or is it all solo?
No, it's all solo. So again, that's another big difference. Traditionally, Final Fantasy, you know, has always had the party systems. The biggest loss for me, actually, because I actually found the combat system quite engaging. And again, as you're changing between the different abilities, the different costumes rather, you know, it does feel like you're doing different roles.
Yeah.
So that's not really the issue. The issue for me is the impact it has on the story, just because, you know, the interrelationships between the characters has always been kind of huge in Final Fantasy, and they reel out, like what we're doing here in this place called the Warrens is we're chasing after one of the protagonists who you controlled in Final Fantasy 13-2, who is a guy called Null, because there's a prophecy that he is going to kill you, and I'm perturbed about that. So they reel out these, not really investing in them. You're not developing them and helping them grow.
Right.
So that's kind of one of the big draws. You're a fan of Final Fantasy and the kind of you completely sold on it. I have to be honest. And so this is another thing. You can use these in battle. So you don't have unlimited items to use as you have in previous things. You have 6 slots.
Yep.
And you can fill them with whatever restoratives you want.
You like your potions?
I do like my potions because I happen to be very, very bad at blocking. And then these are... You have this thing called the EP Gorge down the bottom. You can see that 5 there.
Do you mean gauge again?
Yeah, what's wrong with me? That bar there, that circle. Yes. These are abilities that basically make use of it. And as you can see, these take 2 slices of the 5.
Yeah.
That takes 0. Using them... Basically, winning battles will then give you a chance to refill it, but it's cheaper than using items. It can offer you some cool things. You can stop time, you know, have chances to do more damage. So
It's very Final Fantasy with all its kind of lovely special effects and kind of gorgeous sort of magic and things like that, isn't it?
It is. The graphics have been quite divisive, actually. I think good. It is very Final Fantasy and fantastical, again, you'd expect, but it's not necessarily what I think, combat-wise and gameplay-wise, what a lot of people would be expecting. So I don't know. I mean,
fighting a lot of these fanatics.
I was going to say, so this is the downside. The random battles are gone, but I don't know if I'd necessarily argue that makes it any less repetitive for those who aren't fans of it.
Yeah.
You know?
Because, as you say, you're trying to kind of make your way through this place, but literally every 6 feet you're fighting another guy, right?
Yeah, so these are kind of like... at this stage, these are ones that it's very, very difficult to avoid, and I think the idea is that, you know, they're going to force you to do some. They want to gate you a little bit.
Yeah, of course.
But, you know, I probably should have avoided the ones earlier, in fairness. So there you go, skip that one. So here we go. So this is a cutscene coming up now, where you get to see the joys of the Final Fantasy 13 story. You know, the cutscenes of Final Fantasy games have always been good, and
of course.
This is no different. So yeah, this is, for those of you who aren't keen on spoilers, this is a bit of a spoiler at the end of Luxarion.
But it's relatively early on in the game,
It's
right?
relatively early on, yeah.
So this is the prophesized future. By killing the Savior, a brand new world will be born. Yule. So that's it. All this time, you've been dreaming of a new world where you're reunited with Yule.
It's no dream, Lightning. The future is right there in the Oracle Drive. If I kill the Savior...
So I mean, my argument here would be, do you understand what's going on? For someone who has no idea of the previous stories.
But bearing in mind, I haven't played the game right from the very start.
No, true, but this is kind of one of the first mentions of that character, Yule, who was a big... Noel has a long history with her. He was her protector, and she ended up dying, and that kind of became a big issue in the second game. And so he's now been offered a chance to reunite with her, and that's his motivation in this. But have they really? I don't know if they really explained that well enough in this game. It's all a bit.
So yeah, I destroyed the world.
So is it very much a kind of linear storyline, or do you have kind of decisions to make that kind of change the arc in which way it goes?
The storyline is linear. There is one story that they are very much trying to tell.
Right.
But the point is, it's a much more open game in the sense that traditionally Final Fantasy games have been go from point A to point B to point C to point D. You know, they are linear. As I say, there are 4 continents at this stage, and you can mix and match. If you fancy starting off on a different one, the enemies are really going to be very, very difficult for you, but there are going to be some side quests that are literally just kind of fetch and carry, where you can avoid fighting things if you fancy.
Yeah.
So you really can... Their emphasis has been on you go where you want to go, and there are various benefits and drawbacks of going there. So it is much more open in that sense. But again, because, you know, without giving too much away, I don't know how much that hinders the possibility of a coherent story.
Right. And story has been the kind of thing that's always carried the Final Fantasy games, right?
It has been, and you know, the criticism that a lot of people have of Final Fantasy the 13 trilogy is that the story just isn't that engaging. Like, you know, something that I've always said is I quite like the other Final Fantasy games because they have very flawed protagonists in the sense that, you know, they have human flaws, like, you know, Tidus or Tidus, however you want to call it, in Final Fantasy X is quite immature and, like, you know, naive. Lots of people can relate to that. He's got fear of being alone. She's just quite Lightning's quite standoffish, and I think a lot of people, you know, there's difficulty relating to that.
Yeah. Well, so it seems like obviously some improvements or certainly changes to the Final Fantasy formula, which would maybe kind of make it a good entry point for me. As I say, you know, the lack of random battles, the potential ability to kind of skip through and get from point A to point B while at the same time leveling up definitely sounds more interesting to me. But from your point of view, from an experienced Final Fantasy fan, it's not quite delivering on, I guess, the promise that you would want it to.
No, I think if you've kind of been put off by some of the stuff that most people associate with Final Fantasy for the longest time, you know, in terms of the turn-based battles and everything, this is an opportunity to give it a go again, because the stories are always quite good. Having said that, if you're a fan of those things, I don't really know if this is going to cut it for you, and especially but you know, it's an opportunity to get ready for Final Fantasy 15, which does look like it's going to be a similar battle system, which is quite exciting.
Yep. So that's what we think of Lightning Returns. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and for all things Final Fantasy, keep it locked on IGN.